Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust you had a great weekend. Just to remind you about MindSpeak, of course, we've had wonderful guests this year, Christine Lagarde and Dr. Titus Naikuni. I'm looking forward to hosting Charles Ireland, the CEO of East African Breweries at MindSpeak, this Saturday, the 22nd of February. Charles Ireland, of course, is the CEO of East African Breweries. And I learnt on Friday at the half-year results that EABL has a 44% beverage alcohol share in the EAC. MindSpeak, of course, is held at the Intercontinental, and I'll also put up a link for an interview I did late last year with Charles and a photograph that I liked when we were at that Johnny Walker party I spoke about. You will recall I interviewed MG Vassanji a little while ago, and it was ostensibly around his latest book, which is called The Magic of Saida. And I'm going to jump to page 291, and I've taken little bits and pieces. He heard someone say, Minazi Mine, and he looked up. Now, this fellow, Kamalu, was Tanzanian, half Swahili, half Indian. He's gone abroad, got married, become a doctor, but still pines after his long-lost love, Saida. And he's been looking for her throughout this book. And finally, he's been told that she might be here. Kamal struggled out into the aisle. Where is it? I can see nothing outside. He peered out on both sides. It is here only, Baba, a woman said reassuringly, putting a forefinger on his arm. At the top of the hill, a road goes inside. I was told I can find a woman called Saida here, he said. You will find no one who is called Saida here. He saw no one about. She took him past a few of the huts to the farthest side, its entrance facing away towards the stream, and stopped. Saida, he whispered to himself, she is here. Suddenly, for a moment, I became afraid, he said. Icy fingers gripped me. A gust of air, perhaps, the tingle at the back. What do you feel in that second before your first high dive? Or more appropriately, when you say, what the heck, and walk past a baobab tree at dusk, knowing the spirits live there. What was I headed for? I should have heeded the signs. I have brought you a guest, Zara said. Let him come, croaked an ancient voice. He saw a spectre standing before him, the trace of a shadow looking up at him, its eyes like glinting jewels in the dark. What is that you are wearing around your neck? She had given him a token, a religious token called a tawis. Even in the dark, she had seen it at the opening in his shirt. It is a tawis, he replied, holding it. Drink this uji, she told him. He put the cup down on the ground. He lost consciousness. There was a lady, because I went along after my previous MindSpeak to listen to Mr. Vassanji, and a lady stood up and was insistent and said, there's no way you can write such a thing without it being true. She said, is it fact or fiction? Home thoughts. We drove down to Hippo Point yesterday in Naivasha to attend the funeral service for Michael Cunningham-Reid, and I took a photograph of the cremation, which I'll put up. Point of fact, it was a very moving ceremony, actually. We know a number of family members, not least of which the Prubinski family, Dodo, Cunningham-Reid. And this was taken from the service book. I'm writing a path out of this place where I now find myself. Scenes come flooding back from my book of memory, perplexed by the overt reality of my mortality, and after 1,000 stumbling steps, the shadows grow long over me as I stare back at my life through its many collapsed arbors and overgrown pathways. We met buffalo and zebra on the way to Hippo Point. I liked this tweet from the Ritz-Carlton describing how a properly prepared Russian salad should look like. I thought it looked extremely tasty. And I'm looking forward to being in London for the homecoming revolution, and I thank Angel Jones for coming and finding me one afternoon in my office in Nairobi and inviting me to her gig. I like this quote by an African returnee who said, "I wasn't moving back, I was moving forwards." And basically this function which I'm attending is on the 15th and 16th of March at Olympia Conference Centre, and Angel has really put together a very interesting network and feeds off, white, black, brown Africans who are abroad, want to come back home. And finally I put up a photograph of the Rift Valley yesterday that I took on my way to Hippo Point. Political reflections, let's start with this. The last thing Nairobi wants is the instability to persist, Patey said. It would much rather partner with a peaceful South Sudan in what will be a regional oil boom in East Africa. Daniel Large, a South Sudanese analyst at Central European University in Budapest, said South Sudan was born as a petro-state. Without oil, in terms of paying for the state, there will be huge repercussions. Before the crisis, South Sudan was producing between 220,000 to 240,000 barrels of oil per day. Two-thirds was headed to China. Of course, for the Chinese, the conflict has evoked memories of Libya, where essentially they were expelled in very short order. But analysts are saying China could have little influence in what is largely a domestic tussle between Kiir and his former deputy, Riek Machar. Looking for a magic cure in the form of China to break a deadlock is profoundly misplaced, Large said. There are limits over what China can do. When the current crisis began, many South Sudanese officials and analysts thought Sudan might intervene on Machar's side. Instead, a high-level Sudanese delegation, including President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, flew to Juba to show support for Kiir and the peace process. And I thought this comment was accurate. The elite in Khartoum and the elite in Juba learned a lesson from the one-year shutdown of the oil, said Morrow, professor in Juba. For a while they were working on the idea that the other one would collapse first, but they realized that both could collapse at the same time. Now it seems they are more interested in collaborating for their joint survival. And this is a fact. Even if the crisis ends soon, South Sudan could face a huge reputational shock. And I agree with that. Came across an interesting article which was landed in my inbox, interestingly. Remember, Africa was the original front in the war on terror, saying that the current news reporting forgets the US military's long history in Africa. Talking about an Andrei Basevich article, which was entitled "The US Army Discovers Africa." Brookings Institute talking about how the US needs to step up its game with respect to the continent. And in this article saying, in light of this commentary, you could be forgiven for sensing newness in recent media coverage of US military involvement in Africa. And saying, this was published busy October for the US military in Africa. Special operations forces pulled off raids in Libya and Somalia, as well as a drone strike in Somalia. Fresh crises. Then the US forces were involved in supporting peacekeeping efforts in the CAR, protecting, evacuating US nationals in South Sudan. However, if historians are more and more in agreement that the term discover is incorrect, when talking about places with existing inhabitants, then it should be similarly inappropriate to talk this way with regard to US military activities in Africa. Like it or not, for decades American economic security rested on the evil of the triangular transatlantic slave trade meaning that US foreign policy from its very inception was economically, politically, and militarily linked to the continent. As a result, trade on the high seas and the freedom to conduct this trade was of paramount importance. And talking about the piracy off the coast of Morocco, the shores of Tripoli, and then going forward to the current. An interesting perspective, I think, from an American point of view, obviously. John Pilger, we live, as Time magazine put it, in an eternal present in which reflection is limited to Facebook and historical narrative is the preserve of Hollywood. Is pretty punchy, isn't it? And then he added, in an arc extending from Australia to Japan and beyond, China will be ringed by US missiles and nuclear weapons armed aircraft. Another article which I found interesting post the Hollande visit to the US is that France has overnight become the US's best ally in Europe, at least as seen through the prism of crisis management and military cooperation. John Stanmeyer has won the World Press Photo of the Year for an image of African migrants on the shore of Djibouti raising their phones in an attempt to capture an inexpensive signal from neighboring Somalia. A powerful photograph. Another piece, which I'll just take a sentence. In short, China is on the brink of large, necessary, dangerous transformations that promise to change the country for the better, or make everything, including regional stability, much worse. Asia Times, reflecting on Ukraine, says Washington won't give up as it sees both the political crisis in Ukraine as the emerging financial crisis in Kazakhstan as opportunities to threaten Moscow's economic strategic interests. And then in that same article he says, meet the new Cold War, same as the old Cold War, same but different. One day it's the myriad implications of Washington's pivoting to Asia, as in the containment of China. The next day it's the perennial attempt to box Russia in. Never a dull moment in the new great game in Eurasia. And then two final points. Power from time to time must be embodied in vivid violence, like Voltaire's execution, pour encourager les autres. And I think that clearly applies to North Korea. They say that Japan is a military power, but the defense budget increase in the year to March was just 0.8%, while China has kept increasing its defense budget by more than 10% annually for 20 years. This is Suga. To be called a militarist by such a country is completely off the mark. Coming to the currency markets, the euro is firm at 137.10, dollar index at 80.03, and I like this quote. There's a feeling in the market that the Fed might slow the pace of tapering or even pause amid worsening US economic data. This is a comment out of an analyst in Tokyo. Japanese yen 101.80. Japan GDP expanded at an annualized 1% pace in the final 3 months of 2013, down from 1.1% in the preceding quarter. The median estimate of analysts was for a 2.8% expansion, so considerably slower than many people had expected and predicted. The Swiss franc 0.8925, the pound 167.48, which is the highest since November 2009. Australian dollar 0.9033 touched a 1-month high after data showed good credit growth last month in China. India rupee 61.834. South Korean won 1063.64, rallied at 1% last week, which was its best rally since September. And it's at the strongest level since January 14. The Rial 238.70, Egyptian pound 695.95. Clearly the Saudis, the GCC and others are supporting the Egyptian pound in my view. And the South African rand rallied, as I said it might on my previous podcast, to 1086.43. The pound has surged 1.6% in the past week. Dollar has fallen 1%, euro down 0.5%, yen down 0.4%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, We've had some weak data out of the US. US factory production unexpectedly declined in January by the most since May 2009. But I think that's just evidence that severe winter weather has weighed on the economy. And there are some folks who are thinking that the Fed might slow down its tapering. Euro dollar, I'm still riding my 133.80 stop, and we're last trading at 137.10. Sterling 167.90. Strengthened after Right Move PLC said asking prices for UK homes rose 3.3% this month from January, when they gained 1%. And I wrote about this on the 12th of August 2013, when I said, how does an investor play this recovery? And I think you need to be net long sterling. That was 12th of August 2013. We were at 153 then. And I also refer to the fact that I think there was an outside chance of UK property, which was projected to rally 25% over 5 years, does that in 24 or 30 months, and I think I'm correct on that front. The pound now is at the highest level since November 2009. Gold, that's continued to go higher, 1325.535. This is the highest since October the 31st. Prices climbed 4.1% last week. Biggest increases the period ending August 16. Rebounded so far 10% in 2014 and has caught out all the shorts. I, for one, think it will go lower, but it's definitely making the pips squeak. Crude oil 100.34 climbed 0.7% in New York and extended a fifth weekly gain. Be very strong, but I think it's all been about the cold snap in the US and nothing more. Latest data shows that Iranian crude oil exports jumped to 1.32 million barrels from 106 million in December. And I think we're going to continue to see more Iranian supply on the markets. And finally, I put up a one-year chart of coffee, which has had quite a stunning turnaround. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, an interview with Donald Kaberuka of the African Development Bank and Reuters, expecting SSA to meet its growth target of over 6% this year, saying China's slowdown and its impact on commodities is only part of the African story. I think North African growth remains problematic after the Arab Spring. South Africa needs to address its mining issues, and that he's working to help stamp out illegal wildlife trade. The bank is forecasting growth of 5.3% across Africa this year and 6.2% in sub-Saharan Africa. The African growth story is only partly a commodity story. It's also about FDI, private equity, remittances, urbanization. The commodity story only explains maybe a third of what has happened, he said. And then he's given some more granularity. Algeria and Morocco holding up quite well. Egypt more complicated, around 2%. Libya says I couldn't tell you. And it's a pretty interesting interview there. And then I like this quote: in many ways, Africa is the future and increasingly relevant on the world stage, but conflict persists. Piracy is a growing problem. Aftermath of revolutions in North Africa, civil wars have erupted in the CAR and the South Sudan, and an insurgency is raging in Nigeria that could get a lot worse. And I think, we have seen it get a bit hotter in the kitchen in 2014. The South African all shares now plus 8.89% in 2014. Julius Malema says, change your vote. The economic freedom fighters leader Julius Malema on Saturday called on the residents of Stoffel Park in Mamelodi to change their living conditions. He said the residents were to blame for the lack of services in the area. These roads are like this because you're to blame. You have been voting for the same people. He told residents that the power was in their hands to bring change and improve their lives. There was no water, electricity, toilets, or decent roads in the area. Malema said the fact the government had no money should not be used as an excuse not to deliver services. Government might not have money, but they have Caterpillar trucks to flatten roads to make them usable. The reason you're here is because you keep on voting for the same people. Change is you, change your vote, he said. And then he said he told the hundreds who had gathered at the sports field that the money used on the swimming pool at President Zuma's private Mkandla homestead in KwaZulu-Natal could have built a school. All that money went into the private entertainment of an individual. You must stand up for your children. Malema told resident Zuma could not swim and laughed off the explanation given for the pool, that it was a fire pool. If you want to elect them again, go ahead, but then you have to know one to blame. People still live in shacks, but his cows stay in luxury. He said Ramaphosa was worse than Zuma because he was in the pocket of the capitalists. And then they're saying also, include the white workers. He's saying, that white people must join the struggle for land. Only 2% of whites own land. If they want land, they must join the EABL. I think he's going to prove an absolute lightning rod for the protest vote in South Africa, and I think less than 60% vote for the ANC is simply a given. I'll put up a photograph of him and just mention that, on his Twitter handle he calls himself the Commander-in-Chief of Economic Freedom Fighters and a revolutionary activist for radical change in Africa. Dollar rand, as I thought it might on Friday, has strengthened, last trading at 1061.65. Egyptian pound solid at 696.16. The Egyptian stock market up 11.77% in 2014, and on a currency adjusted basis, the best performing stock market in Africa this year. Egyptian private equity firm Citadel Capital said on Monday it had completed a $530 million program of buying additional stakes in its subsidiaries. The purchases are part of Citadel's transformation into an investment company that will hold majority stakes in subsidiaries in 5 core industries: energy, transportation, agri-foods, mining, and cement. RVR is planning a Kenya-Juba-Cairo route. This is a report in the Business Daily, and actually in an interview I did nearly 2 years ago with Dr. Heikel, he spoke about this. RVR is looking to create a seamless connection between Mombasa and Cairo through Sudan, offering transporters a direct route linking East and North Africa. Cargo will move from Mombasa port to Juba via rail and from South Sudan to Cairo through the Nile River, where RVR's majority shareholder runs a shipping business called Nile Logistics. And then talking about, currently the bulk of cargo from Egypt to Kenya and neighbouring landlocked countries is hauled through the Indian Ocean port of Mombasa. RVR is looking to tap the flow of trade running from Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, and the Great Lakes to DR Congo. The Nairobi to Cairo route via Sudan is shorter than the sea route. It is also faster, given that trains move faster than ships. Tea has for the past decade accounted for 90% of Kenya's exports to Egypt. I'll put up a photograph of the Mombasa Nairobi Railway taken just before the end of the year last year. I'll put up a link for that interview to which I was referring with Dr. Ahmed Heikel that I conducted at the Norfolk. And I'll put up a photograph. He's a very gregarious, engaging fellow. And then remind you of my favourite quote of Karim Sadek, who did a mind speak and famously said, "Do not get too close to politics in order to survive regime change." And then just to go to the markets, and the Nigerian oil shares at a 3-month low. It's down 6.19% this year. And this is a concern around the currency. They intervened heavily last week. The Naira has retreated 1.1% this year. Foreign reserves dropped to 42 billion last week, which was the lowest since October 2012. And the head of research at Lagos-based Vetiver Capital said all of these things are causing panic. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 13.3% in 2014, but bear in mind that on a currency-adjusted basis, it's not performing as well because the SEDI has come down. Management now believes Area 4, this is off Mozambique, contain up to 90 trillion cubic feet of in-place gas. I put up a photograph of the sunrise at the Polana Hotel in Maputo, and a link to that article I read calling it Maputo, the boom town. I said, of course, Mozambique has popped large onto the global radar because of gas reserves that have been discovered offshore and in the deep sea. I've said before that I believe the eastern seaboard of Africa is clearly the last great energy prize in the 21st century, and I believe this lake of hydrocarbons stretches from Mozambique up through Tanzania, Kenya, and Somalia. We remain in the early stage of this discovery process, but Mozambique is further along the curve. Okay, then I came across this report saying there is growing concern in Mozambique that all business runs through the office of the president. How will President Gabuza and his successor manage the process will determine whether Mozambique prospers or finds itself in another form of civil war or strife. As African reporting goes, most eyes in 2014 will likely be on the major economic powers such as Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, or on the crises that continue to spring up on the continent, primarily in Central Africa and South Sudan. However, there are several other nations that are worth watching, as they may be harbingers of Africa's future development. One of the world's largest reservoirs of natural gas, as well as oil reserves, has been discovered off the coast of Mozambique. Enormous implications not only for Mozambique but also for southern and eastern Africa. In the reserves is enough gas to cover southern Africa's power needs for generations. This has the potential to make the country as rich as those on the Arabian Peninsula, and that's why I went when I did. A third bridge crossing the lagoon in Ivory Coast's economic capital, Abidjan, will be completed in December and could add 1 percentage point to economic growth, senior executive of French construction company Bouygues said. I'll put up a photograph of Abidjan. Coming to Kenya, East Africa's cut flour industry posted flat earnings in 2013 as high production costs and competition took their toll. New data shows that depressed export demand has dealt a heavy blow to the European market, which is a prime destination for flours from the region. Data from the Kenya Flour Council shows that the country exported 115,000 tons of flours, worth $482.3 million as of November 2013. And full-year earnings are likely to close at $491.4 million, the same amount earned in 2012 from 120,000 tons of flours. Ahead of the Mindspeak, do have a look. I put up a link for EABL's first half results. Of course, the big story was the collapse in senator volumes, but essentially I thought those results were better than the market expected, and I particularly like the growth I saw in Tusker, plus 17%. Remember, that's their big flagship brand. Guinness, plus 24%, and that premiumization story which we saw expressed in the fact that reserve spirits, following on a triple-digit gain, full-year gain, are up more than 50%. And Charles mentioned at that earnings briefing that EABL has a 44% beverage alcohol share in EAC. And he's speaking about how he expects consumer behavior to go premium as more and more people become wealthy. Kenya is selling a 15-year treasury bond worth up to 10 billion shillings. And that's going to be sold on Feb 19. Uchumi Supermarket is this week expected to kick off its expansion plans that will see it open 4 new branches by May. Juja Outlet on the Thika-Nairobi Superhighway, followed up later with Sokimaya, Maua, and Kisumu. CFC closed at a record on Friday. It's up 17.241%, and it's seemingly going to set a new record today as well. Pan-Africa closed at a record as well. It's up plus 27.777% in 2014. Kenya shilling is at 86.3, but I would have expected it to start strengthening below 86 now, given what's happening to the dollar. The Nairobi all shares in positive territory, but it's had this wild ride. It's now 0.77% higher this year. The NSE 20 is lagging. It's down 1.8% this year. I will be going to Geneva on late Tuesday night, so I'll be out Wednesday and Thursday and probably Friday, because I think I come back around lunchtime. So do bear with me in this current week. Thank you so much. It's appreciated, and I hope to see you at Mindspeak.